or even if we haven't talked about that explicitly in the conversations, a lot of the activities, the things that have been experimented, the trials, the learnings, the ups and downs, at the end of the day, they do have a financial impact. Hello and welcome to the Healthy Business Lab podcast, where usually we interview awesome allied health business owners who share their insights, their learnings, their stories around what it's like to grow sustainable practices. But today, it's another little episode here where you've got just me, where I wanted to duck in and sort of follow the outline that we normally talk about with guests, but just show what's been going on with this podcast, as it's been a very interesting evolution in how I'm looking at it and the impact that it's actually starting to have, even in these fairly early stages. And so we started this podcast in March 2025, and as we go to recording this one now, we're in June, and so we're sort of 4 months in, 12 episodes. I think this is episode number 12, and as I've talked about with a few of our guests, this podcast has been an experiment. And so the theme that we follow with our podcast is learn from the guests that we have. What's their expertise? What's their background? What can we take on board from the amazing knowledge for paying that forward? And how do we look after ourselves as a business owner as we run our practices? And then we talk about experiments, because at the Healthy Business Lab, we like to talk experiments in business and learn from those to do things better, evolve things, come up with new ideas and new plans. And again, the idea of those experiments, this podcast, has been an experiment, and so sharing on that. And finally, we talk about transformations that actually happen. So just giving my little sort of insights. Again, my background is very much, our goal and my expertise is around providing business owners, and especially those in the allied health space, financial brain care. And that's at the heart of what we do. And this podcast was an experiment to start conversations, learn what's going on behind the curtain of business ownership in the allied health space, and just see where those stories led and the conversations they opened up. And by being able to share these stories, some of them may talk about numbers and money, and a few of our guests that we've already had on here, I'm thinking of Nicola Michelle, especially, I know she delved into a bit of detail around those, but each person has generally touched upon some financial matters, or even if we haven't talked about that explicitly in the conversations, a lot of the activities, the things that have been experimented, the trials, the learnings, the ups and downs, at the end of the day, they do have a financial impact. And so by being able to share that knowledge, share the insights, and start to have a bit more openness and conversations around these activities that do have an impact on the financials, has been really encouraging. And it's been interesting then the feedback that I've been getting from listeners is that played on to this idea of we can build sustainable practices. We do need to be aware of numbers, and even just having markers for the different activities. And again, the numbers you're talking about may not even be financial with dollar signs attached. They can be sort of the activities that we're doing, and looking at those from a perspective of what's going to have the most impact. And so that's been super interesting. But then this podcast being the experiment within our own business, it's been fascinating, the community that started to evolve, the conversations we're having, and the ripple effect and the dominoes that have seemed to create off the back of it. And it's, in essence, it's exactly what I'd hoped to do. It's to just generate more conversations, more collaborations, more sharing of knowledge. And to give it an example, and why I wanted to do this episode right now is quite timely, that yesterday I had a great chat with a coach in the allied health space. And that conversation came from this podcast. At the end of the day, it was one of our guests had shared their episode on their social media and tagged us into the post, and we jumped on there to comment. And I'd noticed a very insightful and interesting comment from one of these guests and what they shared. And I thought, oh, that person sounds a bit interesting by the way that they've responded. I'll go and have a look at them on LinkedIn. Jumped into the profile and went, wow, this person's pretty cool. They're doing interesting stuff in the space. I'd love to have a chat. I then reached out to that person. We connected connected. We jumped on a call, a lot of synergies, a lot of alignments in how we thought about business and what we're trying to do in the allied health space around building sustainable practices. And off the back of that, that person invited me to be a guest on their podcast. I, in turn, have also now done a recording with that person, which for this podcast, which is an episode to come in the future. And when we were chatting, the person then said, I think you really needed to talk to another person. And so there's just this domino effect of being introduced and being able to connect around storytelling, getting insights and these types of things. And the conversation I then had with this coach yesterday was, again, this alignment of similar goals, wanting to have a similar impact and being in a similar space, in a consulting space, but also not doing the same thing. So there's opportunities for collaboration and learning and ways that we can support each other so that we can both have the impact that we want to have. And so I just wanted to share that because a lot of our guests have also talked very much around the building of networks, building of communities and learning from each other, because there's more than enough people out there where there's not a competition between businesses and between practices and providers. Because one of the things that I know I've experienced and why I work with allied health providers as well is that myself, my family, we all see multiple therapists for all our individual needs and supports and capacity building things that we're trying to do for ourselves. And we're aware of waiting lists and waiting times. There's enough people out there seeking therapists that we can all collaborate and network to, at the end of the day, get the best outcomes for the clientele that use our services. And so just having those networks and collaborations is an amazing thing to be able to start to build out, which is why I'm super excited where we're currently at with this podcast. And to share a little bit further on that as these conversations have evolved. Actually, I wanted this to be a sort of a weekly episode, and the mechanics of doing a podcast right now, they're currently publishing fortnightly, where we had a massive long list of guests to come on, schedule changes, family commitments here at my end. It throws things out a little bit, and then finding this happy rhythm of being flexible with what we're doing and how we're doing it is something that we're definitely learning on the fly with as well. But it's also the other piece where this podcast will evolve to as well is that we've just started interviewing a bunch of coaches and networkers and community builders and marketing experts in the allied health space as well, in addition to continuing to talk to allied health practice owners themselves. So in the coming months, and I'm still working out whether we're going to just seed those into the cycle or whether we'll have a standalone series for the coaches and the marketers and the community builders and the like. And so you'll see a few little tweaks and changes to what we're doing here, but it's all very much with the idea of having more conversations, learning more from others in the space. And the whole idea of the rising tide lifts all ships, that's 100% where we want to be. And we're super excited that where we've evolved through the early part of this experiment, this podcast, is very much heading along that path. The doors that I've seen it open in our own space of great conversations, great people, but I'm also being able to introduce and connect people off the back of the great people that I'm becoming associated with and aware of what they're doing. So there we have it. That's a bit of a wrap and a jump in for where we're currently at with the Healthy Business Lab podcast. And make sure that you subscribe, because there's some amazing guests coming up in the coming weeks and months. And over the next 2 weeks, I'm sort of interviewing about 10 people that I can't wait to share their stories and get the amazing insights that they're going to be sharing. And so there's so much more lined up for the remainder of this year, but no doubt beyond that as well. As our aim is to do at least 100 podcast episodes, see what impact we're having, see what connections we're making, what community we're building. And yeah, we're only 12 episodes in, and so there's plenty more great stuff to come from here. Again, make sure you like, subscribe, and watch out and listen out for the next podcast episode. Catch you later. Thank you for listening to the Healthy Business Lab podcast. Make sure you subscribe to keep up to date with all the latest episodes.